not again.
Hi, I'm Adam.
And I'm Charlotte. And
Welcome to Perf Damage,
the weekly podcast hosted by a movie-obsessed husband and wife team who work in the film industry.
We'll share stories of film production and restoration. We'll review and recommend. We'll examine the minutiae of subgenres and even microgenres. And most importantly, we will tackle the art of the double feature.
Just remember, all our opinions are our own and do not represent those of our employers.
Thank you for joining us.
Welcome.
Welcome back
To our second video version podcast of Perf Damage.
Super deluxe.
Super deluxe. Before it was just
Deluxe.
deluxe.
Now it's super deluxe.
Super deluxe. That's right. Today we are going to talk about the Paramount Decrees, and these were a set of decrees that were put into place in 1948, and they're very topical today because in 2020 they were just rescinded.
Yeah, quietly.
Quietly rescinded.
Yeah, very few people actually know that they were rescinded.
And what does that mean? What does that mean for the film industry today, in 10 years from now?
Well, in 1948, or when they went into effect, it changed everything.
It did. It changed everything about how films were made.
Yeah, and the way that the film industry was run.
And how they were distributed. It changed everything. And the fact that they were rescinded just 3 years ago, and already stuff has changed. So we're going to look in and see if we think history might repeat itself.
Yeah, do we think that the studios are going to go back to their old ways?
I don't know. Do we?
Well, let's talk about it and find out.
Well, to hear more,
stay tuned.
let's give a brief overview of what the Paramount Decrees are. The Paramount Decrees, also known as the Paramount Consent Decrees, refers to a set of legal agreements resulting from a landmark antitrust case in the U.S. involving the major Hollywood film studios and the U.S. Department of Justice.
Has given unto you these 15, 10 commandments for all.
The case aimed to address and cease the vertical integration model within the Hollywood studio system and halt the monopolistic control by a small group of studios known as the Big Five by ceasing anti-competitive practices.
Wait a minute. The Big Five?
Who were the Big Five?
Well, the Big Five were 5 film studios.
Right. Okay. So, of course, there's Paramount.
Paramount, because it's called the Paramount Decrees.
Right. Who else? Who else we got?
We've got MGM.
MGM. Oh, yeah, the Dream Factory. They were
Dream
probably
Factory.
the number one studio at the time.
Mm-hmm.
We've got Warner, right?
Warner Brothers. That's
Yeah.
right. There's 20th Century Fox.
20th Century Fox, now
How many
part
is
of
that?
Disney.
4. Oh, and then the little Big Five.
Yeah, RKO.
RKO.
Who would have thought?
I know. I wouldn't think of them as like
No
the
one
Big
thinks
Five.
of them as a
Yeah, you'd
major
think,
studio anymore.
Where's Universal?
Yeah.
Well, Universal was considered the little 3 with Columbia and United Artists.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So that's the Big Five.
Wow.
And the Paramount Decrees worked.
Yeah, they did.
It opened up the film industry to more competition. It got rid of vertical integration and sort of paved the way for
New Hollywood.
New
right?
Hollywood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it allowed independent filmmakers to finally make films and get them seen on screens for the first time.
Which sounds kind of crazy, but
Hey,
Well,
that was
we'll
the real
get into it.
challenge. There were people out there making movies. They just couldn't get them seen by anybody.
the effects of the Paramount Decrees really led to the decline of the Hollywood studio system, how movies had been made, and led to the rise of independent filmmaking.
Yeah, it changed the overall business model of the film industry. It changed exhibition and distribution.
So let's jump back to the early days of Hollywood and talk about the Hollywood studio system. So to explain really what that is.
Yeah, and what they were doing wrong, or what.
I mean, they made some great movies.
Yeah, but I mean,
they were doing something right.
I mean, it's not like they weren't making movies wrong.
No.
It was the unfair business practices. So,
Right.
I mean, what were they doing that got the government to step in and sue them, basically?
Yes, there you go. There you go.
Let's analyze that.
So the Hollywood studio system was really in place between the 1920s and the 1950s. It's a time when there were a few major studios that dominated the film industry. So these are the big five that we're talking about. There wasn't a lot of other things happening outside of the big five.
Well, because they wouldn't allow it to happen.
They wouldn't.
And if it happened, they wouldn't allow it to be seen.
Right, because they really controlled every part of the filmmaking.
And that was what got them in trouble.
It is. So let's talk about the Hollywood studio system and sort of the key features that define the Hollywood studio system. I think the first is vertical integration.
Right. What is vertical integration?
So vertical integration is where a company owns both sort of the producing, the manufacturing of a good, and also
The distribution
of that good to the consumer. So there's no middleman per se.
Right.
And in regards to the studios, this means that it allowed them to maintain tight control over content and maximize their profit.
Thank you. I am not a destroyer of companies. I am a liberator of them. The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works.
The next thing that they did was controlled exhibition. Controlled exhibition is when studios own a significant number of theaters and they screen their product in those theaters. So that allows them to dictate screening schedules and maximize their profits.
Right. Because not only did they own, the movie studio, they own the movie theaters that everything was shown in too.
Right. And that's where you can get into like price fixing. Mm-hmm. If you own the movie theaters, then you tell people what you can charge for the movie. Mm-hmm. And if you own a block of theaters and you're charging this much money for them and you decide to raise your prices, the person down the street that owns another block is going to raise their prices. So you guys are all price fixing. That's happening right now.
Right. So another key aspect of the Hollywood studio system were contracts. Studios would have actors or directors or writers or other talent under these long-term contracts. And what that meant was that they could consistently pull from this group of talent to create films. So you didn't have, people weren't free agents to go at will where they wanted to go based on a project. They had to stay within the studio unless the studio decided to loan them out.
Right. If you were a star too, you were required to give them a certain number of movies every year.
And the studio at that point would be in charge of someone's career path. So if they decided this person's really good at this stuff, that's what they would use them for. And also how much they were getting paid for things.
Well, and that was a big part of it. When you had these people under long-term contract, then you dictated what they got paid, no matter how popular they were,
exactly,
or how many tickets they sold for you, or how much merchandising you could do based on their name. It didn't matter. They were locked into a contract.
Right.
Another key feature of the Hollywood studio system was block booking. Block booking is when studios engage in the practice of booking multiple films in a theater. So in order to get a bigger picture, you would have to agree to show 4 lesser pictures.
Let's say you're a little theater and you want to show Oppenheimer coming out.
Right.
All right, we'll give you Oppenheimer, but you're going to have to show Bros.
Exactly.
And a bunch of other little pictures in between. That's block booking.
Whether you want to show Bros or not. Like, that's not a choice. In order to get Oppenheimer, you have to exhibit Bros.
If you're block booked, you don't have any space to then get the Universal horror film that's coming out that the kids will like. You don't have room on your, in your theater to put that in there.
Right. You've got eight movies in the next 3 months that you have to show.
Right.
Which leaves no time to show Frankenstein or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
But the Hollywood studio system wasn't all bad. We got tons of really great films out of this system.
Right.
Some of the greatest films of all time. It created classic films, some of Hollywood's most enduring stars, but it could also limit creativity due to formulaic production methods and studios could exploit talent under these long-term contracts. So that's the Hollywood studio system. So now let's talk a little bit about the antitrust case that was brought about during this era. In 1938, the Department of Justice launched an investigation into the major film studios to see whether or not they felt they were violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. Now, what is the Sherman Antitrust Act? It was a law from 1890 that prescribed the rule of free competition among those engaged in commerce. The Department of Justice starts investigating in 1938. What else was happening in 1938?
I don't know. What was happening in 1938?
Well, in 1938, Technicolor was becoming kind of a big deal. Adventures of Robin Hood came out.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
beautiful.
Three-strip.
Three-strip Technicolor. If you want to hear more about Technicolor. So that was in 1938, but they were under investigation for a while.
It wasn't until 1942 that the federal district court ruled in favor of the government, finding the studios guilty of antitrust violations.
The 1942 ruling said that studios needed to cease certain practices of basically the vertical integration model, but things didn't change overnight. The studios appealed the ruling and drug it out for 6 years.
Well, that all changed in 1948. The case reached the U.S. Supreme Court under the name United States versus Paramount Pictures, Inc. And on May 3rd, 1948, the Supreme Court issued a landmark decision against the studios. The name Paramount Decrees stemmed from the fact that Paramount owned most of the theaters. They had 1,450 theaters in their chain, and then they owned 30% of a lot of other theaters as well.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
The decision held that the big five major studios had violated antitrust laws. And the big five, again, was Paramount Pictures, MGM, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, and RKO Pictures.
Yes, RKO, you heard that correctly.
But the little three were not excluded from this antitrust law. Universal, United Artists, and Columbia Pictures were also found guilty. They were accused of favoring the big five's theater chains over independent exhibitors. They would show their films in theaters owned by, let's say, Paramount or MGM.
They'd give them to them first before they would
Over like the little
an
guy.
independent. Yeah.
Right.
That makes sense because they want to get in good with those guys.
Yeah, and
they
they
had
could
all the theaters, so
Well,
why
and they
wouldn't
could
you?
probably make one deal to get it in X amount of theaters versus making 100 deals, you know. So that makes sense from a business
They also
standpoint.
probably owned the bigger theaters too, with more seats. So
Possibly.
they would probably make more money if they got them in their theaters.
Right. So in 1949, the Supreme Court ruled against the major studios, issuing the Paramount Decree. Now, the decree consisted of a series of agreements that required the studios to, 1, divest themselves of their ownership of movie theaters. They needed to cease practices of block booking, which required theaters to accept a package of films as a condition for getting a single desirable film. And then they had to end practices that discouraged competition and exclusive dealings. I don't really know how they would enforce that. That seems...
Yeah, the
seems like that would
first
be under the
two
table.
are very obvious.
Right.
The third one seems like something that's kind of unenforceable because it's like, okay, what, are you going to have somebody sit in on every deal that these guys make?
Yeah.
Or in every meeting? No.
Yeah, I don't really understand how
Yeah.
they enforce
I
that.
think it was probably on good faith.
Right. Probably.
Good faith.
Yeah. So the Paramount Decree effectively dismantled the vertical integration model that had dominated the industry for decades, but it opened the industry up to more competition. It allowed for independent filmmakers to have their films shown in theaters, and that's because the theaters weren't block booked, you know, they weren't completely booked, so they had more opportunities, more slots to fill that a little independent film could sell to a theater. During the time that the studios were appealing the Paramount Decrees, and then whenever they were actually enforced, this was a really bad time in Hollywood.
Yeah.
It was a changing time.
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that were affecting the studios in addition to this case. Television.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
That's a big
Television.
It always comes back to television.
Well, the studios have been afraid of television ever since it started. So, this was, like a lot of homes started to have televisions and they had access to free entertainment. So they stopped going to the movies as often as they used to.
Right.
And that affected their bottom line in a big way. And it got them very afraid.
So in 1947, that was a really weird year for Hollywood because in the UK, they imposed this 75% tax on revenue for any foreign film, American, on any film that would play there. And this was enforced between August of 1947 to springtime in 1948.
And they did this to kickstart their own British film industry? Is that the deal?
Yeah,
They
American films were dominating their film market and their theaters, and they wanted to help kickstart, like you said, the British film industry. The problem was they weren't making enough content to fill consumer need or the theaters that were there.
They weren't producing enough film to get it in every week.
No.
So people could go see them.
This was actually a really good year for cinephiles because in 1948, we had The Red Shoes. Powell and Pressburger came out of the UK.
Yeah. Fallen Idol, too, by Carol Reed, right?
Yeah.
That's a good one.
And then Hamlet by Laurence Olivier, starring and directed by.
Nice.
That was another one that came out.
Yeah, but what would people have missed if they were in the UK?
Yeah, but if you were
time?
in the UK and you were trying to see films, you might have missed films like Road to Rio.
Yeah, that would be a real bummer because those
Yeah.
are fun. You would also miss Lady from Shanghai, the Orson Welles classic.
Or Miracle on 34th Street.
Aw,
They might have been denied.
that would be horrible. It's such a lovely film.
So I don't know all the specifics of what films were shown and weren't shown. But it wasn't a tax that was imposed very long. Again, it was only 7 months that was around.
Yeah, and then they figured out that they couldn't support their own industry.
Yeah.
That they couldn't ramp it up fast enough.
Yeah. They're like, all right, this isn't working.
Yeah.
Also, the people were probably like, I really wanted to see that Miracle on 34th Street.
Miracle on 34th Street looks so good.
They ruined Christmas for all of England.
Yeah, they were a bunch of Grinches.
You did it again.
I stopped mine on purpose that time.
So back to the Paramount Decrees.
Yeah, once they went into effect.
Yeah, what all changed within the film industry other than the obvious things, the stop of the vertical integration and that sort of things? What else changed?
So much stuff changed, right?
Like what?
Well, at this point they were dealing with television. We talked about that earlier, right?
Yep.
So this was when we entered the format wars.
Of the 1950s.
Right. They had to spend more money on films. So costs rose dramatically for production. They also couldn't keep costs down with star contracts.
Right. So they didn't have the contracts, so people were free
Free
agents.
agents. So you then would go to the highest bidder. So that bid people up. You had to spend more money on films to make them look bigger.
So the studios also looked to technology to change and entice customers.
Part of the cost, too, was developing that technology.
Right. Right. So lots of money was spent by 20th Century Fox developing CinemaScope.
Right. What was the first movie? The Robe?
The Robe, 1953 was the very first one.
You also had VistaVision the next
Paramount,
year, right? Paramount.
All the movie studios were renting CinemaScope because everybody wanted some sort of a gimmick kind of thing, except for Paramount, who developed their own process with VistaVision. The very first film with that is White Christmas, 1954.
The two greatest figures in show business, Bing and Danny, as two ex-GIs who form the perfect partnership. Rosemary and Vera Ellen as the sisters who have them in a spin. With Dean Jagger as the unemployed general they take under their wing.
Apparently, there's still quite a bit about show business I don't understand.
Oh, it'll come to you, sir. Just takes time. We wouldn't be any good as generals.
You weren't any good as privates.
This was also the big boom for 3D, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was another technological
very short-lived, but very...
2 years. Had a little run. Maybe a year and a half.
maybe a couple months. Yeah, so, and the big one there is House of Wax, Warner Brothers.
1953.
The House of Wax, the ultimate dimension in terror, comes to the screen in Stereovision 3D. Vincent Price, at his diabolical best, will take you room by terrible room on a journey to the ultimate chamber of horrors. Stereovision 3D will synthesize before your eyes the terrifying reality of it all. In Stereovision 3D, House of Wax.
Yeah, they were looking for any angle to get people to come out to the theater to offer them an experience that they couldn't get at home.
Right. So the Paramount Decrees were actually really good for the little guy. Again, it opened up independent films to be shown in theaters, and more independent films could be made. And another reason was technology changed.
Yeah, 16 millimeter cameras were becoming more accessible. Sound equipment was becoming smaller
And portable.
and
Cheaper.
Yeah, and film was cheaper. Processing was cheaper. The barrier to entry was much less.
Right.
So if you wanted to be a filmmaker, you could be.
Sounds like today.
Now it's even easier, unfortunately.
Maybe too easy. I mean, look at us.
I mean, we're making something right now. It's not film.
This is not film.
This is not film, people.
If you thought this was film, you're mistaken.
Sorely mistaken.
The little films had a better chance of actually getting into a theater because they weren't block booked.
This is the rise of road showing. Road showing became a viable way for an independent person to make one or two prints and then drive them from town to town. They would rent out a theater in a town.
So it was actually the film going on the road.
Yes, that's why they called it a road show. It wasn't, but you know, they kind of made a big deal out of it. To get people in seats, they would have somebody that come beforehand and talk about it in the town. They'd sometimes have the stars show up. They'd do giveaways. They'd do gimmicks.
That's interesting. There's a couple films in the library that I've come across that have roadshow versions, and often they have additional music.
They have an overture,
an entr'acte
right
at the end. Like they're a little. Sometimes they're longer.
Yeah, many times they're much longer because it didn't require. Well, first of all, you were making a night of it, so people wanted their money's worth.
Right.
Secondly, a lot of these films were more independent oriented. You didn't have a studio cutting it. It was
right. You didn't have to pay for a lot of prints. You could just pay for a couple prints.
Correct.
And so
it
could
could
have
be
a long
longer.
version.
Yeah, like it was a detriment to a studio to have a long film because it costs more to produce prints for it.
Yeah.
So why would you do that? You know,
Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
That film's 11 miles long, apparently. The IMAX version.
11 miles.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Did you ever see the pictures of it on the platters?
The platters, yeah. They were all the way to the edge, like almost falling off.
That's right.
That's why there are no trailers.
Imagine carrying that around on the road.
11 miles of film. That's a lot of film.
Falls off the truck and there's 11 miles. You got to go get the film back.
It just keeps rolling and rolling and
I
rolling.
don't think that's rolling anywhere. Anyways, so roadshow versions.
This also goes into independent producing at the time.
The roadshow?
Yeah, the roadshow was a fiscally possible way for a independent producer to earn money back on his film. So, he produces a film, you take it on the road, you play it to sold out houses all over the country.
Maybe with a gimmick.
With some sort of gimmick. You know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I think I do.
Yeah. It all leads back to William Castle.
Yeah, William Castle, Mr. Gimmick.
Yes. He was the king of the roadshow. And he would always show up to his own roadshow screenings, too, which was kind of fun. And do introductions and greet people outside, do interviews and things like that. So.
Let me ask you a question. Were you holding his hands throughout the picture?
I was holding him back. He was running out.
Tell me, did you enjoy did you guess the surprise ending?
I had some ideas about it, but I wasn't sure.
How about you?
No, I didn't have any idea the way this picture ended.
Tell me, will you tell your friends the ending of this picture?
Oh, no, never.
No, I'll let them suffer through it.
Yeah, if you want to hear more about William Castle.
We have 2 wonderful episodes.
2, not 1, but 2.
2.
Yeah, check it out.
So anyway, that's enough about roadshows.
Another thing that changed after the Paramount Decrees was sort of an influx of foreign films started being shown more. And for the same reason that theaters were now more in control of what could be booked. And maybe also people were just more interested in that. People coming home from World War II had seen a lot of the world, and now they were interested in, you know, if someone was based in Italy, maybe they wanted to be able to show people that, no, this is what Italy looked like. This is, you know, who knows?
That's a really good point. I didn't even think of that. But that might be why
independent films foreign films
became so big. Or
I just blow your mind.
You did. You just kind of blew my mind. I was like, whoa. Wow, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see, that's why you always have to put it in perspective of what's going on in the world versus what's going on in the film industry. Because, you know, a lot of things are related. And it's just a guess at why maybe directors like Vittorio De Sica's The Bicycle Thief became really big, or there's other French films that became big.
Like Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah. In the 40s. I mean, this is before the French New Wave and all that.
Right. That was the 60s.
Yeah.
But those were the films that kind of laid the way for the big foreign film boom of the 60s. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So 1960s, that kind of changed everything. New Hollywood, the rise of New Hollywood.
By the 1960s, a lot had changed in Hollywood. The Paramount Decrees were fully enforced, and a lot of old Hollywood had pretty much burned to the ground. And out of those ashes arose a new Hollywood, independent filmmakers and producers, and the studios really struggled. So in the 1960s, there were a lot of companies that were coming in and purchasing the studios so that they didn't fall under. For example, in 1966, Charles Bluedorn's company, Gulf and Western, which had started in the 30s as a car bumper production company, and then went on to make a ton of money in the oil business. They bought a controlling share of Paramount Pictures in 1966 because, you know, why not?
Yeah, we're going to get into pictures.
But they weren't the only ones to do that. The only big company.
Yeah, a lot of odd companies, like real outliers, decided to get into the film industry at this point.
Yeah, like what does an oil company want with the movie studio? I guess they were just trying to diversify their portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, that's how we got into oil.
Yeah.
You know, you got bumpers, you got oil. You can't make bumpers without oil.
Yeah, I mean, they go hand in hand, and you're going to need a movie to watch in a car in 50 years.
Right.
So, makes sense.
Yeah, so, it wasn't just Paramount that got snapped up by some strange company, some strange conglomerate. The Kinney National Company, which owned parking lots and funeral homes, purchased Warner Brothers in 1967.
So they went from temporary parking spots to permanent parking spots to a film studio.
You can get your first parking spot and your last one. All at Kinney.
All at Kinney.
So dumb.
And there was another one in 1967.
Yes,
right?
1967, UA, United Artists, also they got purchased by Transamerica Corporation.
What the heck's that?
They were an insurance company.
So were they ensuring the movies were good?
I wouldn't bet on that one, that's for sure. That'd be a really bad policy.
Yeah, it would be. All right, I'm going to stop with that now.
With the dissolution of the studio system, the studios look to fresh new faces to guide their new concept of Hollywood.
Right. The new Hollywood. So who was the new Hollywood?
Well, it was personified by people like Francis Ford Coppola, Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese,
Hal Ashby,
George Lucas,
Sidney Pollack and Sidney Lumet,
Roger Corman.
Roger Corman. Now he's really the poster child for New Hollywood.
Yeah, that's a guy who personifies New Hollywood. He came out of independent filmmaking.
Mm-hmm. He gave so many people their start.
This guy built himself from nothing, you know.
So another thing in the 60s, independently produced films were on the rise. In 1967, films like Bonnie and Clyde were released. That was produced by Warren Beatty and then later distributed by Warner Brothers. Another one in 1967, The Graduate, came out. That was an independently produced film, and that went on to be the highest grossing film of 1967.
You know, I did not know that The Graduate was independently produced.
Yeah.
I had no clue. Oh, yeah. Oh, here's one that we talked about in
1968.
Yes, in our podcast about William Castle. Rosemary's Baby, 1968. Eventually released by Paramount because he had a deal there.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, he bought the rights to the book and produced the film himself.
Mm-hmm.
And probably the most important one of this period, 1968's Night of the Living Dead. At its release, it was the most profitable film ever produced. It ended up making $12 million domestically and another $18 million internationally. That is 250 times its budget.
Wow.
Yeah, that's not, you can't even. There's no analogy in baseball for that one.
I don't even know what that means.
Well, you say it's a double. If it makes double, it's box off.
Maybe you do. I don't know. I'm never.
Oh, that's what they always say.
I'm never quoting baseball, or maybe people are quoting baseball, and I'm just
you just don't know what it is. That's
I don't know what they're talking about.
Anyway, and then probably the most influential film of
1969. I know where you're going. Easy
Yep.
Rider.
Yep.
Yeah. Independently produced and then later released by Columbia Pictures.
Many people say that is the defining moment of New Hollywood. That's when it was birthed.
Filmmaking.
Yep. That was when it was birthed. So.
And again, a lot of films were independently produced and then later released by a major, instead of before in the system where you had vertical integration, where the film would have been produced by the studio.
Yeah, produced and developed at the studio.
Yeah. So this is what was different was these were coming, they were sort of buying things that were in production or maybe packaged. Yeah. Which is still kind of how things
That's
are
how
done.
things work today. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Most films are not produced within the system. They are produced, as a package or packaged and then bought that way.
To present time 2023, which who knows when you're watching, it could be some other time, but that brings us to 2023. And actually no, it doesn't, because it brings us to 2019 when the Department of Justice, the Antitrust Division, filed a motion to terminate the decrees. They were claiming that they no longer serve their original remedial purposes and no longer serve to promote or protect competition and innovation. They stated that in today's world, the decrees could inadvertently harm consumers by preventing innovative business models from reaching their fullest potential for the exhibition of America's film industry. They are absolutely talking about streaming.
Oh, I mean, without writing streaming in there, that is exactly
what they were talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So they started looking into it in 2019. And it wasn't just this one that they got rid of. They looked into a whole slew of antitrust decrees and different things that they thought maybe were no longer relevant. And in August 2020, a federal court terminated the Paramount Decree, effective immediately, but with a 2-year sort of grace period on block booking. Let's sort of do a slow roll out of 2 years to 2022.
Very strange.
But what's strange is that this really didn't make big news whenever it happened. Maybe people didn't think that it was that big of a deal.
Well, I think they kind of slipped this one by us is what's happening.
Well, in 2020, there was a
lot going
news.
on. Yeah, I'm not saying there wasn't. We had a pandemic. We had an election year.
There's a lot of stuff going on.
There's a lot going on. But this one, no one talked about, and they should have.
Well, maybe, again, they didn't think that it was as important. They didn't think that it was important anymore or relevant. So maybe news didn't think that it was.
I feel like that's really short-sighted in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
To look at the current state of things in 2020, I think maybe everything they said was true. because there was basically no theatrical at that time. And maybe they thought that was the way it was going to be.
Well, yeah. If you remember back in 2020, people said theatrical's dead.
Mm-hmm.
It's never coming back, which would just start an argument with us because we'd say, what are you talking about?
Yeah, who doesn't want to go to the movies?
People are going to get sick of sitting on
shared
their couch.
experience is what makes it special.
Where are kids going to go on dates to?
Yeah, it's that guy
To the couch?
making some random like joke in the back that
Yeah.
makes me laugh.
Exactly.
That makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah. You know, when you're at AMC and the Dolby projector thing comes on and it says, yes, the projector's still on. You always got that guy that's like, is the projector still on? Or
Yeah.
when Nicole comes on
And we all cheer. Everybody
quotes
cheers.
along. We're getting way off topic
We
here.
are, but
we always said theatrical is not going away. There is nothing like seeing a movie with a bunch of people.
well, and here we are in 2023. The summer of 2023
Mm-hmm.
is wrapping up, and theatrical is bigger this year than it was pre-pandemic.
Thanks to Barbie.
Thanks to Barbie and partially to Oppenheimer and Into the Spider-Verse. And
Yeah, well
There were-
speaking of Oppenheimer,
yes,
let's talk about block booking. So in 2022, that's when block booking was all right. You're allowed to do that again. That's what the DOJ
Yeah.
said.
I don't know why you would ever tell anybody they're allowed to do that again. Doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, how is that okay now but wasn't okay then?
Right. You can force people to take a movie they don't want to get a better movie later on. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So remember how we were joking about Bros and Oppenheimer earlier?
That's a true story.
That's actually a true story.
It is.
Adam, do tell.
So I have a friend that works for a major.
Hold on, let me get comfortable.
And he told me a story about Bros. When Bros came out, and I'm not besmirching Bros as a bad film in any way. It just didn't make the splash that they were hoping it would theatrically when it came out. It didn't earn as much money as they thought they were going to earn on their opening weekend. So theaters were looking to dump it on their second weekend to find something more profitable. But when they called the booker at the studio, and the booker then negotiates with the studios for the films, and he says, "Hey, look, we're gonna dump Bros. We can't. Whenever you make a change like that, you have to tell the studio. They have to be aware. We're gonna take it down to one theater.
Didn't do so well.
It's not doing well. We want to find something more
else in
profitable
there.
in there." And the studio, their position was, well, we have this movie called Oppenheimer coming out. And if you'd like to actually have Oppenheimer in your theater, then you need to see Bros out as an A title in your major theaters, the full run for 3 weeks. You have to hold it, even though it's not making you any money. And you know that you could find something more profitable to put in there. But in order to get Oppenheimer, you have to keep them where they're at.
Crazy.
That is the definition of block booking.
But that seems crazy.
It's a real story.
Crazy.
Yeah, this actually happened. There's more to it, but I can't say the rest because then people will know who the person is. So
Yeah.
but that's actual block booking, and it's happening right now.
Oppenheimer also had a different kind of block booking. So this is a film that was shot in IMAX, and IMAX has some control or all control. I don't know all of it, of what plays in IMAX theaters at your local theater that shows IMAX. So they sort of decide. And if a movie is shot in IMAX, then it's guaranteed at least a 2-week run in that IMAX theater. Well, for Oppenheimer, they guaranteed 3 weeks, which doesn't seem like a big deal until you take into account that IMAX theaters make a lot more money usually than a regular 2D theater, partly because they cost more, but they're also sort of more popular.
Yeah, they're highly sought after. Who doesn't want to go see something in the optimal way you can see it?
Yeah.
Especially if it's shot for IMAX.
Yeah, and if a movie's playing for 3 weeks, that means that no other IMAX film can be shown in that 3 weeks. And for Oppenheimer, that's exactly what happened. So In July of 2023, Mission Impossible came out, and it came out 1 week before Oppenheimer. So they only got a 1 week window to show in IMAX before Oppenheimer kicked it out. And Oppenheimer had a
3-week guarantee.
They dominated IMAX theaters' entire North American footprint for 3 weeks.
I mean, that's really important during summer when things are stacked like that, too.
Yeah.
You know, you have 1 or 2 weeks grace, and then another giant blockbuster comes out. But in large format like that, if you can dominate for 3 weeks, that's crushing
a lot of money.
3 movies.
Also, they told Tom Cruise, because Tom Cruise came out, he was super pissed that they were only going to guarantee 1 week before they were kicking him out to put Oppenheimer in all the IMAX theaters.
Yeah.
And they said, well, hey, man, we can put it in 3 weeks later, which would be a month after Mission Impossible came out. And then who cares? Like, who's going to go see it? They're not going to make what they would have made.
Yeah, no way.
Had they had it there longer. And I mean, that's partly Mission Impossible's fault for putting it.
You know what?
But
no, in their defense, studios grab these dates like a year or two ahead of time. So you don't know what's going to be next to you.
Mission was also postponed quite a few times.
Yeah.
This may not seem like a big deal until you factor in what the difference is that a 2D, regular showing of a movie will make versus an IMAX movie.
Right. So
that same movie in IMAX. Variety had a really great story that explained how much movies make on what they call a premium large format like IMAX versus just when that movie's released in 2D at the same Cinemaplex. And they use Spider-Man Across the Universe as an example.
As their example. So this is really illustrative of why these companies fight for this position. Sony's Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse made $120 million from 4,313 North American screens.
In its first
week. Now, if we drill down a little bit, regular 2D screens averaged $19,736 per screen per location.
So that's like 20 grand.
20 grand per screen, which is really great. That's a really good multiple there. Then if you look at IMAX screens, they averaged $34,214 per screen.
So they're making $35,000.
35. So we're talking
almost double
significant amounts of money.
Yeah. That you're going to make in a premium large format versus a regular 2D
experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, you know why? Because people want to go see it the best way they can,
mm-hmm.
right?
They cost a little bit more.
Which
sort of blows that notion that people don't want to pay more for
a premium experience.
Yeah, which is wrong because they do.
Completely wrong, because whenever you try to get tickets to IMAX screens,
those are the ones
always sold out.
Yeah, those
always sold out.
Always sold out first.
So I think that illustrates that's another form of block booking.
Yeah,
basically.
Absolutely. So
especially during a super busy time like that.
Oppenheimer was block booking the IMAX theaters, and it cost Mission Impossible some money, or
it definitely cost them money.
Yeah, considering Tom Cruise saved Hollywood last summer.
I mean, they should have bowed down.
So with the Paramount Decrees being gone, I think a lot of that we talked had to do with just the different business models that are out there now. So especially with the companies that are mostly streaming only,
right?
Only companies.
Yeah,
like Amazon or Netflix.
They didn't start as entertainment companies.
Right.
They started out as tech companies, basically.
Yeah, that then bought a, second run theater, showing all the stuff that the first run theaters had already shown, then they show in the second run.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, honestly. That's what Netflix was.
Yeah.
How did they decide at this moment to look into the Paramount Decree?
Right.
And get rid of it? I'm sure it was some sort of lobbying.
Oh, I'm sure.
By these companies. But, their whole system has always been vertically integrated.
Mm-hmm.
You watch these shows, they're advertising their own stuff first,
mm-hmm.
above everybody else's.
And they could price fix.
Well, that's...
essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. They do price fix, because every time Netflix decides to raise it, guess who else raises?
Hulu's going to raise their price.
Everybody's going to raise it because they don't want to fall behind. So, you know, it's basically like the top 5 again, or top 8, you know, and they're all telling you what their content should cost.
Right.
So all of this stuff that was happening back then is happening now, currently. But
legally.
And absolutely legally now, as of a year ago.
Right. Right. So do you think that the Paramount Decrees being rescinded, do you think that that has anything to do with why the strikes are happening right now? Because right now we're in the middle of the WGA strike and the SAG actors strike that have been going on. The WGA one's been going on for months.
Yeah. Yes, it does. It does.
You think that it's
fundamentally, but directly, no, I don't think so. But, you know, I think all of this is happening. All these strikes are happening because of transparency.
Right. And the lack thereof.
Correct. Like if these companies, these large streaming companies would just allow people to see viewing, because the studios did it years ago.
Yeah. We have box office
numbers. You now
numbers.
have box office numbers broken down by, you know, country, and like you can really drill down on them.
And television, you sort of have like the Nielsen ratings.
Right. You have some sort of measurement.
Right.
But the streamers don't let you know. And
well, they just tell you, but they don't give you metrics.
Right. And they change them all the time,
Yeah.
too. Sometimes you can watch it for 6 seconds and it counts as a view, and all these kinds of weird things.
Well, and I also, with that, I think it's weird that they just autoplay the next episode, which
Right.
I think sort of inflates stuff.
Yes, correct. Well, we know that we've fallen asleep to things, and then the next
play
day
and you wake up and
woken up, we've watched some entire series that we've never seen. So
yeah, or you
yeah.
say like, wait, when did you watch that? And you're
Yeah.
like, I didn't watch that.
Yeah.
Whether ghosted or
Yeah.
yeah. So
yeah, I think transparency is the big thing, because a lot of these people are fighting for, you know, being paid correctly, for
being paid how they've traditionally been paid with box office.
Well, the studios had set up these metrics a long time ago. You know, you get box office bonuses depending on how well a film does.
Right.
So you earn a certain amount of money for writing or directing a film or acting in a film. And that's all up front. It's in your contract. But depending on how well that film does, you get significant box office bonuses that can be, you know, large percentages, 30, 40, 50% of what you earned up front.
Right.
So those become large income streams for these people. I don't want to get on a soapbox, but
you're kind of on a soapbox.
I'm kind of on a soapbox right now. You talk strikes, so
I know,
you know,
I know.
Yeah, that was your mistake of bringing that up. But,
I know.
But that's and it all drills down to transparency.
Mm-hmm.
It really is, because you have no way of knowing other than the numbers that they tell you, and they don't release them on very many things. So.
No.
They don't make them accessible. And that's not fair.
No.
They're studios, and they want to be studios, but they don't want to play by studio rules.
No, but now because of they've figured out how to release movies in theaters for the limited amount of time they need to qualify for Academy Awards, and now the Academy Awards have given Oscars to the streaming platforms. And they're sort of, by doing that, they're saying, all right.
They're legitimizing them is what
they
they're
are.
Doing. Yeah.
And sort of to combat that, the Academy Awards are actually changing their eligibility rules to make the time that you need to play in a theater to be longer, so that it's more like a theatrical film, which sounds great, because you're saying, hey, streamers, you guys want to play by our rules, you want to win our awards, you know, you're going to have to do this now. But what I'm worried about is how that's going to affect independent films, because now an independent film can't just play LA, New York for a week engagement. Now they're going to have to play in X amount of cities,
which
for
costs
X
more
amount of
money.
time.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to pay more to be able to do that. So there's a chance that some of the littler guys are going to be losing out again, which is why the Paramount Decrees were good for the little guy.
Yeah, they were.
And now that we don't have them, it's bad for the little guy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they allowed these companies to grow unfettered for years and years and years. and not play by the rules that the studios are. So they are studios. They are studios, and yet they do not play by studio rules. They don't have to produce things under union rules, but they want their cake and they want, no, that's not the right analogy.
They want to have their cake and eat it too.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
Or you could say it.
They want to have their cake and eat it too. That's the thing. So, well, for instance, The Irishman. Let's talk about The Irishman. The Irishman was a project that was set up at the studio that I worked at for years. And Martin Scorsese, it was kind of a pet project of his. He wanted to make this film, and every time the studio would look at the film, they would say, hey, this is financially irresponsible. Why would you spend $300 million on this 3-hour period drama?
Right.
When we would put comps together, this is so
what are comps?
In a studio, whenever a project comes in front of you, you put together a group of what we call comps, which are
it's like
similar films.
Comparables?
Yeah, comparable films.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Comparables.
Yeah. So, you look at period dramas, you look at other films that De Niro, the last 4 or 5 movies that.
So you look at the box office that was brought in.
Box office that was brought.
So that, the type of film, maybe the director.
Yep. Those kind of things.
You sort of figure out.
And you put together like a group of comps. You director comps, actor comps, film comps.
Right.
And you look at them and you kind of assess from all of these other films, and this
film cost $300 million.
It made $17 million at the
what's
box
it gonna
office.
Make? Yeah.
And you say, hey, does this look like this is a good, there's a lot of instances where, hey, this looks great.
Because it's an investment.
Right. Well, I mean, ultimately, that's always, it's a creative investment is what it is. Because you want creative people involved, but you need to make it for a price where it makes sense to a studio on a studio level
to make
that
money.
You're going to earn money.
Yeah.
That movie specifically was never financially responsible for a studio to make at that level with those actors.
So then why did Netflix decide to make it?
So Netflix was hungry to be a legitimate studio at that time. They saw themselves as a studio, and they didn't have any deals with like really legitimate Oscar-winning directors at that point.
Right.
And so if they could produce a film by an Oscar-winning director, that would legitimize them as a studio. And so they said, I don't care what it is. We just had a truck of money back up.
Yeah.
And offload. You can have all that money to go and make it. Yeah.
Take it.
We don't care what it costs.
We don't care what it brings back.
We don't even care if people watch it.
The money just fell off the truck.
Hey, there's a whole truck of money that fell off over here.
It's crazy. They still talk like that in
Why
Hollywood.
do they talk like that?
I don't know.
I mean, Joe Pesci was in the movie, though, so.
That's why they're talking like that.
Yeah, that's why they talk like that. Anyway, our studio could never make that movie work from a financial perspective. And that's why they never made it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because we judge a film by its box office. Mm-hmm. That's the number of eyes on it. So now you just have to look at their metrics.
Yeah, try finding the metrics for The Irishman.
Who knows, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. They said it was very popular when it came out.
Yeah,
that's what all said.
Popular.
It was very popular.
All right, so that's a look at the Paramount Decrees and how they affected the film industry then, and how them not being around is affecting the film industry now. And
yeah, I think
how's it going to play out?
I think we answered that question at the beginning. Do you think that the studios will fall back into the same practices that got them in trouble in the first place?
For the most part, yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They're not going to buy theaters because they don't need to.
No, and that would be a bad bargain at this point.
Yeah, but that money is going to go into a streaming platform instead. But the block booking,
it's already happening.
That's already happening.
Price fixing is already happening.
Yeah.
So it's all repeating itself.
Yep. So do you think the Supreme Court's going to have to get involved, or the Department of Justice will get involved again and regulate the film industry?
Well, it's not the 40s, and I don't think they see the consumer the same way they did back then.
Yeah.
I don't think the protections to the consumer are in place that were in place back then.
So you don't think that they'll ever try to get the industry to adopt more transparency?
It would. Well, I think ultimately that's what all of this is about right now. The strikes is about transparency. Do I think that they're going to result in transparency? No, I don't. Those guys are going to try to keep that like the studios did with foreign for a very, very long time. For a long time, studios never reported foreign.
Really?
It was what they called slush money. So,
and that's a huge part of
it's sometimes more than what the movie makes domestically.
So they do that so they don't have to pay the.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us as we talk about the Paramount Decrees and figure out what the heck's going on, what happened then, what's happening now. We don't know.
Why'd they do it on the sly like
what
that?
Are they doing?
What's going on?
The government and Hollywood in cahoots with each other. It's a crazy world out there.
Just make those movies.
Yeah, just make those movies. Hope you have enjoyed this and maybe learned a few things. If you got any comments or things to add, just add them below. I'm going to link an article that we read that was extremely helpful from Megan Elizabeth Norris from the University of Miami School of Law. It is about this entire thing, so the antitrust laws then and now, and it's an incredible read, and I will link that in the show notes for you all to enjoy.
Yeah, if you want more depth, that will take you.
That's where you go.
Yep.
Lots of
take you there.
Lots of legalese in there. A lot more than that was in here.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well.
Anyway, thanks for joining us again.
If you want to get a hold of us, all that information is in the show notes.
Hit us up in comments.
Yeah, send us an email. We love.
And I think that this there's a much deeper discussion to be had.
There is. There's a lot to discuss with
this.
There's
a
lot of topics in here. That's the dog. And it's time to go.
Thanks for joining us here on Perf Damage.
I cheered you, but you got an empty glass.
I got nothing.
Here, watch. Here. This is for the no.
And they didn't want the Wild West out there.
Everybody says the Wild West way too much.
You take offense to that because you like the Wild West?
No, it's just like everything's the Wild West. Oh, this meeting is the Wild West. Before we had this thing, it was the Wild West. It's too much.
Things that annoy Charlotte.
You don't know about the Wild West.
So offended by
I know. I really do hate the whole, like, everything. I don't know if it's just my department.
Yeah.
Everything is the fucking Wild West.
That's funny.
Everything was the Wild West.
Oh, until somebody came in and made it better?
Yeah. Or sometimes stuff is the Wild West, but it's just like, dude, get a new fucking analogy, please. Tell me exactly what do you know about the Wild West?
Well, but I said the Wild West in a term that I think probably would have worked, right? Like when there's a giant vacuum for something, then it becomes the Wild West.
They didn't have vacuums in the Wild West?
They didn't have vacuums in the Wild West.
There were no vacuums then?
Yeah, there was. Did you see 1923? They had that first vacuum in there.
Shit, they did.
Yeah. Remember she thought it was
Maybe
like
that was
too
the
expensive.
Wild West, but it wasn't like the Wild Wild West. Maybe there's a difference.
The Wild Wild West.